time for Ask the Mayor on KWBE. Typically, we have in Mayor Stan Worth, but he's off this week on other things, and we welcome in, I think for the first time, I'm pretty sure, Pat Feist, Beatrice Electric Superintendent. Thanks for coming in, Pat.
Well, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
Great to have you in, because we don't talk about what is a very critical part of the city's overall utility system over time. We're going to get into that today, but one of the things when I was asking you to come in and notified you by email earlier this week, I thought, well, have a nice morning, no problem. Here the rain comes and stuff. Didn't have any problems for taking you away from overnight, did we?
Nope, we didn't have any issues at all last night, so pretty happy about that.
Yeah, really. Just gentle rain is good, not a lot of wind and
That's right.
hail like that. Tell us a little bit about the department, because, you know, a lot of what you do, maybe people don't think about as much. They just say, hey, the lights are on, the air conditioner's running, everything. I'm happy, but talk about your department a little bit.
Well, I'll just give a little bit of information about the system. We have 10 substations that we manage here in the city of Beatrice in our coverage area. As we talked earlier, we have about 192 miles of overhead and underground lines that we maintain and upgrade. And we also have, so to take care of all that, we have 16 employees in the electric department, including myself. We've got 8 linemen, 2 foremen, and then several technicians and an IT guy. So that's kind of the system in a really small nutshell.
Yeah, as you work in an enterprise where you have to be available 24 hours a day, how do you handle that shift wise? Is it kind of staggered a bit, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we've got 2 guys that are on call every week, and they're on call every 5th week. So we like to have 2 guys out on any outage issues, just from a safety standpoint. But it seems to work pretty good having 2 guys on. Then, if depending on the size of the outage or the storm, if they need more people, then they'll contact me or contact other employees to come in.
It's almost like police and fire a little bit. You have to make sure you cover for all parts of the day.
Yep, you sure do. So yeah, we've got guys that are on call from the end of the day through the next morning, and that's in addition to their normal work day. So if they get called out, those are just extra hours that they have to work every day.
Working around electricity, I would imagine safety is a big part of it. What's the training involved with your staff?
So most of the training that we have, our linemen are required to go to a licensed and accredited lineman school. That's the very basis that we have for an applicant. And then we have ongoing training that we do every year. The guys are very safety conscious. They're the ones out there doing the work, so they take that pretty seriously and make sure they follow the safety rules and things. Is looking back on the city's website about kind of the overall history of providing electric service in Beatrice, and I think it was, if I remember right, it was back in the maybe late 1940s or something, where you actually took over the electrical distribution system in town. Is that unusual for cities to kind of do their own? Because some, don't they leave it mainly up to a larger public power district or something, or a regional one? There's a lot of cities that do that, leave it up to a larger public power district or regional. Every once in a while you hear about a city or municipality that will take over their own area. I've read recently about a couple of cities in Colorado that are doing it. So there's benefits to it. Obviously you can maintain things at the level that you want and keep the upgrades and the funds in your local system. So that's a big plus. And you have a little more control over purchasing power and looking at different providers for your energy and things like that. We'll get into that a little bit later on in our program here, because that's one of the big changes with the new wholesale agreement that you now have transitioned fully to. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Did want to get into the fact that we are into the summer, and normally we get some hot stretches for maybe a week or 2 at a time. It seems like we've had shorter duration ones this year, like a 3 or 4 day hot spell, then it goes back to a little bit cooler weather. But what about demand at this time of year? What's it looked like so far for you? So our demand is that we've hit on those hot days is pretty normal. We've been in the 37 to 38 megawatt range, which is very normal for us in the summer. And actually our winter peaks are about that same amount too.
Really?
So we peak about the same level in the winter and summer. So we have a nice mix of all electric homes and businesses that have consistent loads.
How does that factor into the setting of rates when you have peak demand? If you can just kind of, without getting too deep into the weeds on
well,
that,
it makes it a lot easier if
Yeah.
if you have a levelized system like that where your peaks are the same in both parts of the year. It makes it a lot easier to set rates. Makes it a lot easier to plan for system upgrades. You don't have to plan for huge peaks at one time of the year or anything. So it just makes things a lot easier all the way around.
In the time you've been in Beatrice, what's the all-time high daily, would you say?
The all-time high, I believe, was 42.8, and that was the February event that we had, that extremely cold weather.
Oh, wow.
I believe that was the peak that we've had since I've been here.
Yeah. That financially affected a lot of communities in a big way. That really was an impact. How did it affect you, this city, and your department as well?
Well, I mean, obviously there was some extra expenses there, just due to the fact that we had never seen those peaks before. Had to purchase some power on the market when it was extremely high. But we do have finances available that we have put away for emergencies like that. So we were able to cover those costs without any increases to our customers or anything like that. And we have recouped those costs since that event happened. So
it's kind of a live example of the criticism government sometimes takes about why do you keep so much money in reserve, and that's kind of a balancing act. But there's a live example of where it kind of paid off.
It did pay off, and it is a balancing act. You want to keep enough money on hand so that you can do system upgrades, replace damaged equipment when it happens, or weather events like that where it costs you a lot more money to get the power here that we need.
You worry about a repeat event like that because you hear capacity issues in other parts of the country, and do areas have enough ability to handle the demand into the future and big events, unforeseen events? Is there a concern that could happen again?
Well, with weather related, there's always a concern it could happen again. If you look at the history, it happened about 10 years prior to that. It wasn't quite as severe, but weather's cyclical, so it could happen again. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you exactly when. We just try to be as prepared as possible for it, and hopefully we can weather through it.
Yeah. Pat Feist, Electric Superintendent, with us on Ask the Mayor today. We'll have more in just a moment. Back on Ask the Mayor today with Beatrice Electric Superintendent Pat Feist in for Mayor Stan Worth today. We were talking about storms and the big February one that happened, I want to say a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now. Time flies. But of more recent note, let's go back to mid-December last year when we had that rather fast-moving storm come through. It was kind of a straight-line wind event, although there was possibility of a spin-off of a twister from that. But even as short as it was, that did quite a bit of damage.
Yes, it did. We had the main damage was just trees coming down. And anytime you have a 90-mile-an-hour wind, you have that's always possibilities. There were several trees that came down. The biggest area was 13th and Monroe Street that snapped off quite a few poles. The guys did a great job working through the night because that's a main feeder line along Monroe Street there. They got all the new poles set and that main feeder back on. We went home, I believe, about, I don't remember exactly what time, I guess. It kind of runs together a little bit. But we had a little over 700 customers out of power at the beginning of that storm. By the next day, we had everyone back on, but just a few that had damage at their houses that they had to have repaired before we could turn the power back on.
One thing we should point out, too, that, and people maybe don't think about it all that time, but some of that work to repair is often being done while the storm's still going on or there's still a threat out there. So there's some risk to employees that are out there making those repairs on behalf of everybody.
Yeah, with with those type of storms, you never know if another one's coming through or if it'll back in on you a little bit. But the guys, they keep a pretty good eye on the weather and try to work as safely as possible, even through those difficult situations.
Yeah. More recently, the one 3 weeks ago on a Saturday, which probably didn't do, other than the hail, didn't do as much damage in Beatrice as it did to the southern part of the county around Wymore and areas in there. And one thing about that is when you get an event like that, it's tough for, a small town utility to handle that on their own. So your department, I think Fairbury, Crete, some others sent crews down there. Talk about that kind of sharing of resources, because you never know when you're going to be the one that needs it, but it's nice to be able to help out others as well.
Sure. And so we had all of our outages from that storm taken care of that Saturday night. We had everyone back on. So Sunday morning we sent a 4-man crew down to, or I'm sorry, 3-man crew to Wymore. They worked all day Sunday, and then we went back on Monday also and helped them finish up as much of the restoration as we could. We always try to help out when anyone calls and requests for help. We've been on the receiving end of that. The tornado in '96, we had quite a few entities come in and help us to get our services back up for our customers. So we try to help whenever we can, as long as we take care of our area first, and then we'll send crews out to other areas if we need to.
The electrical damage in Wymore, was it pretty significant for that type of a storm? Or?
It was. They had a lot of broken poles and lines down, main lines that they had to take care of. So it was pretty substantial. I think they were hit a little bit harder than we were from the storm. Just from what the guys told me, the damage seemed to be a little more severe.
That's always kind of a hope that you get some state and federal reimbursement for some of that, but it always depends on, too, a little bit how widespread of an area it was and if it qualifies or not. So you got to jump through.
There's some hoops that you have to jump through, some cost levels, I believe, that you have to hit to qualify for the federal level. I have not heard whether they have or not, but hopefully they'll get some of those funds back from the emergency funds from the federal government. So
let's talk about some of the projects going on this year. What are crews up to as far as any upgrades or new services or changes? So
we've been rebuilding some lines kind of in the northeast part of town. Currently we're setting poles and getting ready to string new wire on Arthur Street from 5th to 13th. We're actually putting in a double circuit there so that we can upgrade to a new voltage level that we're trying to get our whole system to. And the guys are doing a great job there. They've got all the poles set. They'll probably start pulling wire next week, hopefully. We've also rebuilt the line along the trail. We built a new line, which will actually replace 3 distribution lines. So we'll be cleaning that up, getting all the old lines out here in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully that area will look a little bit nicer. And then we have all of our normal maintenance poles that we find that need to be replaced. So those calls come in all the time for poles that seem to be leaning a little more than they should be and things like that. So
Things wear out.
Once we check on them and determine whether they need to be replaced or anything, then we'll set up a project for those.
You talked about conversion to higher voltage. That's been a long-term process, hasn't it? I mean, you look at the city of Beatrice, its population hasn't changed a lot, but I imagine the footprint has too. Maybe there's more demand or whatever. Talk about the history of that, when it started, how long that takes.
It actually started in the 80s. It's been an on and off project. In the last probably 15 years, we've been very consistent, doing a section a year, trying to get as much done as possible. We'd like to get the whole city converted to that one voltage. We actually just finished some circuits east of 19th on Lincoln from 19th to 27th. We were able to take the substation at 27th and Lincoln offline. That was just a 4,160 volt substation.
The one next to VSDC out there? Okay.
Yeah. So We took that one offline. That one was a little bit trickier because we had to work with BSDC to upgrade their circuits because they own all their own circuits on their property. But we've got all that done. That substation's offline now, so we're in the process of getting new equipment to rebuild that to cover the east side of town. But going to the higher voltage, it's more efficient. Our line losses are less, so we have it actually brings our demand down a little bit, brings our costs down a little bit. So, and as it's been a long process, but as we go through, we try to rebuild all the circuits so that they're done and we don't have to revert back to them in the near future for maintenance or upgrades or anything like that.
I was curious, what does it cost to rebuild or renovate a substation?
Well, the transformer itself that we bought for that was $700, just under $800,000 just for the transformer. Then you'll have another, probably close to another $1 million in equipment, feeder breakers, buildings, and all that, all the control equipment. Yeah. So it's dependent on the size and the equipment that you put in there, $1.5 million to $2 million for our substations. So
budgeting for that takes a lot of planning, plus, again, a reason for the reserve.
Yes, exactly.
That you need to have that money there to do those things. One of the things that we hear about from time to time is overhead transmission versus underground. How often are you able to do that? I imagine it's something you probably can't do en masse for a whole community, but how often do you try to do that, and what are the advantages of that over overhead lines?
Well, one of the advantages, obviously, is you reduce some of your risk to weather events, to tree damage. Overhead lines are obviously more susceptible to tree damage and things like that. Any new areas of town, we try to always put in underground. Some of the lines that we do rebuild, if it's possible, depending on what else is underground already, if there's room, we try to put some of those underground, especially ones that have minimal access, residential areas that don't have alleys. When we rebuild those, we try to go underground with some of those just to make it easier for us to maintain it. We don't have to worry about getting as big equipment in there to work on things. So that's
basically line and conduit, and then you can have the ability to, if there's a fault, you can pull that and
correct. Any new underground we put in, we install conduit and then pull our high voltage cable through that. Just makes it easier down the road. If you have to replace a section, you don't have to go back in and dig everything up.
Yeah. So okay. Need to take a break here, but before we do, one thing to touch on briefly, a tree trimming program that you've done over the years to kind of keep obstructions out of lines. How beneficial has that been?
We believe it's been very beneficial. You still have the chance in major storms for tree damage, but if you keep your trees trimmed back, there's minimum approach clearances that we have to maintain. Your smaller outages and things are just reduced a lot.
Yeah.
And when you do have a major event, you don't have the tree problems aren't quite as bad, so you usually can get power back on a lot quicker.
It's also worth mentioning for a homeowner, business owner that's thinking about planting a new tree, kind of visualize what it's going to look like, 5 to 10 years from now, not what it looks like now.
Exactly.
And that's always in the right place.
That's always a good thing to look at.
Yeah, okay. Pat Feist, Electric Superintendent, with us today. We'll wrap up Ask the Mayor in just a moment. We're back on Ask the Mayor today to wrap things up with our guest, Pat Feist, Beatrice Electric Superintendent. Automated metering infrastructure, AMI, easier to say. You started that a few years ago. It was kind of a gradual transition for the electric department and the water department, getting it all in place. What benefits has that had for the community?
So the benefits, there's one of the big benefits for us is that we're able to read the meters at any time automatically. We don't have to send people out to read meters anymore. So that's one big feature. Another one is on the electric side, there's outage management with it. So anytime a meter loses power, it sends in an alarm telling us that we have an outage. So we get notifications very quickly about outages out in the field. That's been a big thing. Larger outages, we're able to track which areas we brought back on, if there's any single meters off still in that area. it makes things a lot more efficient when we're working some of those bigger outages that we've talked about.
So Pat Feist is sitting at home at night, and he thinks he has the time off for a little while, and an outage occurs. I imagine if you have your smartphone with you, you pretty much know right away.
I get the alarms very quickly, yes.
Yeah, so, and then that, it's not, as I understand, it's not that, I mean, you don't want residents to not call you. They can still call in or whatever, but
correct.
It's kind of a way of confirming what you know at that point then? Is that it?
Right. So, yeah, we still encourage people to call in because a lot of people will call in with that haven't lost power. They'll call in with limbs on lines or things like that. So we still encourage people to call in. We just ask them to be patient on larger storms. You know, there's a lot of people trying to call in. But as far as the outage portions of it, we do have those on our outage maps so that we're able to monitor those. It helps a lot getting to areas where we know where the issue is. We're able to track it better and get power back on a lot quicker. But yeah, we still do encourage people to call in if they have any questions or concerns or anything like that.
And I would imagine, depending on the extent of the problem, how much damage there is, of course, it still takes time to repair that, but reducing the time that it takes for you to know about it and pinpoint the areas has helped out somewhat.
Yes, it has. Just being able to see the area that's out and then knowing how our lines run, we'll know which areas we need to go to look for the problems.
Are a lot of communities, I don't know if you know this or not, are they going to automated systems like this? Or
There's a mix. There's quite a few communities that have been doing it throughout Nebraska even. I don't know all of them that have, but I know the AMI companies have been in Nebraska for quite a few years working with utilities and getting things upgraded. So,
does it pretty much cover the whole community now, or do you have to add to it? Do you adjust to it?
We just have a few of the old style meters that are left out in the field. There's some extra work that needs to be done on those, but 99.9% of all our meters are AMI now. So.
I see. Okay. Well, this is, I think, the first year that you're fully transitioned away from your old wholesale power supplier, which was NPPD, to a new one, AEP, out of Ohio. It gets pretty complicated, discussing where you get your electricity from, where it's bought from, and without getting too deep into the weeds on it, what's been the benefit to the city cost-wise of doing that, or is it too early to kind of judge, how much of a benefit is there to this point?
Well, one of the big benefits is that we've been able to lock in our prices. We've got contracts, as you said, with AEP, American Electric Power, for all of our energy. So those contracts are locked in with no escalation through 2030. We have our capacity contracts for the next several years with Lincoln Electric System. So the biggest thing is AEP will predict our load for the next day, and they provide that information to the Southwest Power Pool, which is our regional transmission authority, and they basically put that much energy on the market for us, and then we use that. So it's been pretty seamless, but the biggest benefit is that we know what our costs are going to be going forward for an extended period of time.
And the benefit is then you don't, or at least the hope is, you don't have to pass along a wholesale increase to a retail customer down
Correct.
the road.
So we haven't had a rate increase since 2015. We did a rate study this past year in 2021 just to verify, make sure that we were covering all of our bases and that we were going to have enough funds going forward. There were some minor adjustments made, but to my recollection, there was no increase to any of the individual rate classes or anything. And that's kind of our plan going forward, is to hold those rates steady. We review those rates on a yearly basis just to verify that we're being fair to our customers, that we're going to have enough cash to keep improving the system and to make the upgrades that we need to make.
Imagine not spending as much on wholesale power allows you to build up that reserve a little bit more quickly.
Well, it allows us to build up the reserve a little bit. It also allows us to recover from the weather event we had that February, but it allows us to put a little bit more money into the system on upgrades, so that hopefully we can improve it and make it a little more reliable.
Have only about a minute left, but I did want to touch on when you were with NPPD. I know they had kind of an energy efficiency program or incentives to make some improvements that homeowners or businesses could tap. Once you went away from that, you kind of had to come up with your own, or
so we still offer some just from the city itself. That information is on the city website on the different rebates that we have available, different energy efficiency things that we support. So hopefully people visit that website and see what's available there. If there's anything that's beneficial to them, that they can sure apply for that and use it.
In recent months, has there been much use of it? I know there have been some bigger customers that have made maybe some more significant, say, weatherization or conservation improvements, but for like the typical homeowner, is it used that often?
I think it's been used quite a bit. Some of it's seasonal. A lot of like our air conditioning rebates and things like that for new heat pumps or new air conditioners. A lot of that happens in the spring when people are upgrading systems. So some of it's a little bit cyclical with the seasons.
I see. Well, Pat, we're out of time today. Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.